The crunch of gravel beneath my tires sent a chill down my spine. Something was wrong. My silver SUV rounded the final bend of Pine Haven's winding country road, revealing the land that had been in my family for generations. But it was no longer my farm. Instead of the golden wheat fields swaying in the summer breeze, a 3-story concrete monstrosity loomed before me, its reflective windows gleaming like 1,000 watchful eyes. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. The farm I had grown up on, the land I had worked, loved, and fought to protect, was gone. Where my grandfather Samuel Walker once tilled the soil with his bare hands, there now stood a luxury hotel. Manicured lawns stretched where wildflowers used to bloom. A massive parking lot sprawled across what had once been rich, fertile land. Bright yellow construction barriers wrapped around the property, while workers in hard hats bustled about like busy ants. My heart pounded. How could this happen? I had only been gone for a month, a crucial consulting job in Singapore that my family desperately needed. Sarah and I had locked everything down, secured every document, every legal right, or so we thought. A construction worker noticed my SUV idling at the roadside and walked toward me, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I forced my legs to move, stepping out of the car, though they felt like rubber. "This is my family's land," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm Jordan Walker." The worker's face paled slightly. "Oh, Edom, you're the owner." He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. Before I could demand an explanation, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Jordan, emergency, call me now." But I couldn't look away from the monstrosity rising from what used to be my farmland. Each step I took toward it felt like a violation, my boots crunching on the soil that had fed my family for 4 generations. Then I saw it, a massive sign near the construction entrance, bold and proud. Willow Ridge Community Development, approved by HOA Board. And below it, in sharp, authoritative lettering, Project Director Karen Whitmore. My jaw tightened as the pieces clicked into place. Karen Whitmore, the self-important president of Willow Ridge HOA, had always seen my farm as an inconvenience. The same woman who had sent endless letters about grass, height, fence regulations, and neighborhood aesthetics. She had fought me for years. Now she had taken what she had no right to claim. A stack of papers lay on a nearby table. Permits, zoning approvals, official stamps. Each page was a piece of a puzzle that had been assembled behind my back. Rage and disbelief burned in my chest. What had she done? And more importantly, how could I fight back? The words on the construction permits felt wrong, not illegal, perhaps, but carefully calculated. The language was precise, the phrasing just vague enough to slip past most eyes. A loophole. That was Karen Whitmore's specialty, finding ways to take what wasn't hers without leaving a trail. The construction worker shifted nervously. "Sir, you can't be here," he said again, but his voice lacked conviction. He didn't stop me from looking, didn't call for security. I turned to him, offering a thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'll be leaving soon." But as I drove away, my mind raced. How long had this been in the works? What legal gymnastics had Karen pulled off to make this happen? And most importantly, how could I prove it was wrong? My phone buzzed again. Sarah's message. It still sat unanswered on my screen, but I needed to get my head straight first. I needed information. A billboard caught my eye as I passed through town. "Willow Ridge, growing together." I let out a bitter laugh. Growing together, huh? Apparently that meant taking without asking. I pulled into a local coffee shop, ordering black coffee and grabbing a notebook from my glove box. Time to start piecing this puzzle together. Dates, approval stamps, meeting minutes, names of officials. I jotted down everything I could remember, mapping out a web of connections. "This seat taken?" I looked up. The waitress held a fresh pot of coffee, eyes filled with curiosity. "Rough day?" she asked. I hesitated, then let out a slow breath, my grip tightening around my pen. "Not rough," I said, a determined smile forming. "Just getting started." The old file cabinet in my barn had sat untouched for years. But today, dust be damned, I was going to find something Karen hadn't accounted for. Sunlight filtered through the wooden slats, catching the dust as I pulled out a stack of yellowed documents, my grandfather had carefully preserved. My fingers traced the edges of old property maps, legal agreements, faded letters, each one a thread in a decades-old story of ownership, struggle, and resilience. One document stood out, a hand-drawn property map from 1952. The intricate pencil lines marked every boundary, notes scribbled in the margins in my grandfather's handwriting. I could still hear his voice. "Knowledge is your best weapon, Jordan. Never let them take that from you." As I examined the pages, a pattern emerged. Karen hadn't built her empire overnight. The HOA had been chipping away at property rights for years. Then a faded yellow envelope caught my eye. Inside, a series of letters detailed a land dispute from decades ago, one that looked suspiciously similar to mine. I wasn't the first person Karen tried to steal land from, but I would be the last. The property dispute from decades ago wasn't just similar, it was identical. The same tactics, the same legal loopholes, the same excuse of community development. But someone had stopped them before, and now, buried in these old documents, were the answers to how. I pulled out my phone and began snapping photographs, making sure to capture every detail. Every faded signature, every zoning law reference, every handwritten note. These weren't just relics of the past anymore, they were evidence, weapons. Sarah would help me sort through them later. She had a knack for seeing connections I sometimes missed. But right now I had to focus. A sudden noise outside made me freeze. The crunch of gravel. Someone was coming. I shoved the documents back into the file cabinet, my heart pounding. Moving to the barn's small window, I peeked through a gap in the wooden slats. A white SUV rolled to a stop near my property line. The HOA parking sticker gleamed under the sun. Then she stepped out. Karen Whitmore. Her designer sunglasses reflected the midday light as she surveyed the land like a queen inspecting her kingdom. Even from a distance, I could see her clipboard clutched in perfectly manicured hands. She took her time, making notes, her gaze sweeping across my land, as if she already owned it. She didn't know I was watching. Her expensive heels sank slightly into the soft ground, the same soil where my grandfather had once grown wheat, where my family had toiled for generations. Behind her, the concrete beast of the hotel loomed, completely out of place in this rural town. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. Marcus, my lawyer. "Found something interesting. Call me ASAP." I clenched my jaw. Karen wanted me to react. Wanted me to storm outside, yell, "Do something rash." Anything she could twist into me being hostile or unreasonable. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I waited, watching as she scribbled notes, snapped a few photos, then returned to her SUV, driving away in a cloud of dust. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain just enough to keep my head clear. This land no longer felt like home. It felt like a battlefield. I turned, gripping the files tightly. Somewhere in these documents was the key to stopping Karen, to exposing Willow Ridge HOA's corruption. I looked back at the hotel rising in the distance. They thought they'd won. But they had no idea what was coming. The double doors creaked open and I stepped inside. My leather briefcase felt heavier than ever, filled with stacks of meticulously organized documents, each page a weapon in the fight for my family's land. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the packed room. The air was thick with tension. HOA board members sat stiffly in their seats, their eyes flicking toward me. Curious residents filled the chairs behind them, murmuring among themselves. They had come to watch the show. At the head of the long wooden table, Karen Whitmore sat like a queen overseeing her court, her perfectly pressed blazer and carefully styled blonde hair exuding control. But I saw the tightness in her jaw, the slight clench of her fingers against the table's edge. She knew I wasn't here to roll over and accept her theft. I set my briefcase down, unlatched it, and slowly pulled out the first set of documents, old property maps dating back to my grandfather's time. "I'd like to discuss the recent development on my family's farmland," I said, my voice steady, controlled. The room fell silent. Whispers died instantly, replaced by an almost electric tension. I spread out the maps, each one notarized, meticulously preserved. The lines were clear. The boundaries were undeniable. "These maps," I continued, my fingers tracing the faded ink, Show that the land where the hotel now stands was never legally transferable without my explicit consent. A tiny twitch in Karen's eyebrow, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She knew she was sitting on shaky ground. I pulled out photographs, time-stamped images showing the farm's continuous maintenance, crop rotations, family activity, land use over the years. Each photo was another nail in the HOA's coffin. In the back row, a middle-aged woman leaned forward. Martha Thompson, a longtime resident, fair-minded and sharp. I saw her expression shift as she scanned the documents, from curiosity to concern. Karen tried to cut in. "Mr. Walker, this is hardly—" "I'm not finished." My tone was firm, but I didn't raise my voice. Years of legal consulting had taught me the power of a measured response. Some board members shifted in their seats, suddenly uncomfortable. Then I revealed my trump card, a detailed environmental impact assessment. "The hotel," I said, laying the report on the table, "has drainage issues that could contaminate local water sources. The soil disruption alone violates county environmental guidelines." Silence. Then a single hand went up. "Martha, can you explain the environmental risks?" she asked. Karen's face paled. She knew this was far from over. I walked Martha through the technical details, breaking down complex environmental concepts into plain language. This wasn't about confusing people with legal jargon. It was about making them understand what had been done to them. The room was silent except for the sound of my voice. They were listening, truly listening. Across the table, Karen Whitmore's carefully constructed facade was cracking. Her lips were tight, her nails drummed impatiently against the polished wood. Anger, fear, desperation. She knew I wasn't just challenging the hotel's construction. I was exposing a pattern of systematic overreach. "You can't just take land," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "This isn't just about a hotel. This is about property rights, about family legacy, about community trust." A young board member, Justin, leaned forward. I recognized him from previous meetings, one of the few who didn't blindly follow Karen's lead. "We have some questions about the documentation," he said, his voice thoughtful. I almost smiled. Questions meant they were listening. Questions meant they were doubting. For the next hour, I methodically dismantled the HOA's case. Each document, each photograph of my family working the land, each legal reference proving they had no right to take it. The tone of the meeting shifted. Board members who had looked dismissive now seemed uneasy. Martha was taking notes. Justin was flipping through the environmental reports, his brow furrowed in concentration. The only person who remained silent was Karen. The confident queen of Willow Ridge HOA now looked like someone trying to hold onto a crumbling throne. By the time I finished, the air was electric. I hadn't won, not yet, but I had planted doubt, and doubt would spread like wildfire. As the board members and residents filed out, Martha stopped beside me. "Those environmental reports are serious," she whispered. I don't think the board fully understood what was happening. I nodded, gathering my documents. The real battle was just beginning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as I stepped into the parking lot. I saw her. Karen stood near her SUV, arms crossed, watching me. Her eyes burned with a mix of hatred and fear. She knew. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, a knock at my door interrupted breakfast. I opened it to find Mr. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, holding a weathered manila envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed it across the kitchen counter. "You'll want to see this," he said, his voice heavy with decades-old secrets. Inside were faded photographs, handwritten notes, old property records, and with them, a truth I never expected. Karen Whitmore hadn't just targeted my farm. She had been stealing land for years. Sarah's hand rested on my shoulder, grounding me as I spread the documents across the kitchen table. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. These aren't just old papers. They're a roadmap to Karen's entire strategy. Across the table, Mr. Henderson settled into a chair, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing ghosts from the past. "She's been doing this for years," he murmured. "Nobody ever had the courage to stand up to her before." I picked up the first photograph, an aerial shot of Pine Haven from the late 90s. Red boundary lines had been carefully drawn onto the map, but something was off. The lines didn't match the official county records I'd studied. Mr. Henderson sighed. I remember when she first became HOA president. Said she wanted to improve the community, but better for who? Sarah, ever meticulous, began making copies of the documents. Each page was a piece of evidence, each photograph a potential weapon in our legal arsenal. Then I noticed movement outside. A young woman walked past our window, pausing just long enough for me to recognize her. I'd seen her at HOA meetings. She hesitated, glancing toward our house, then quickly walked away. Who was that? I asked. Sarah had noticed too. Her brow furrowed. I don't know, but she looked nervous. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, lowering his voice. Some folks in the community have been talking. Not everyone supports Karen's plans, but people are scared. She has a way of making life difficult for those who speak out. I carefully mapped out the connections. Each document told the same story, a pattern of calculated manipulation, property rezoning, subtle boundary changes, mysterious permit approvals. Karen had been playing a long game, and my farm was just her latest target. We need to be careful, I told Sarah. These documents are powerful, but if we rush this, she'll find a way to discredit everything. The phone rang. Sarah answered, keeping her voice neutral. The conversation was brief and cryptic. When she hung up, her expression had changed. Someone wants to meet you, she said. Someone who knows more about Karen's past projects. Mr. Henderson let out a soft chuckle. Seems like the truth has a way of finding its way out. I organized the documents, sealing them in protective sleeves. Years of meticulous record-keeping were about to pay off. Karen thought she could take what she wanted without consequence, but she had no idea what was coming. Through the window, a car crept past the house. In the passenger seat, the same young woman stared at our home, watching, waiting. But for what? Sarah squeezed my hand. We were about to find out. Sarah squeezed my hand. We're in this together, she said. I nodded, staring at the documents spread before me. They weren't just papers. They were proof. Proof of a systematic land grab. Proof that Karen Whitmore thought she was above the law. But more importantly, proof that we were going to fight back. As Mr. Henderson stood to leave, he paused by the door. Sometimes, he said, his voice low and thoughtful, the quietest people have the loudest stories. And with that, he was gone. A single document slipped from his jacket as he walked out, fluttering to the floor. I picked it up, my pulse quickening. Another piece of the puzzle. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table organizing the stacks of old maps, property deeds, and county records. A maze of information was coming together, forming what I hoped would be an airtight case. Across from me, Marcus Callahan, my lawyer, adjusted his reading glasses, his sharp eyes scanning a survey map from the 1960s. These property lines, he muttered, tracing a finger across the paper, are more complicated than I first thought. His voice carried a mix of excitement and concentration that made me feel for the first time truly hopeful. I remembered all the times Karen had looked down on my family, sneering at us in community meetings, mocking our outdated farming methods and inefficient land use. And her perfectly pressed suits and manicured nails had always contrasted sharply with my calloused hands and weathered boots. But today, those hands would become weapons of justice. Sarah brought us fresh coffee, setting a boss of old records on the table. I found these in my grandmother's things, she said. Marcus's eyes widened as he flipped through the yellow documents. These, he muttered, could be game changers. As the afternoon sun faded, casting long shadows across the room, the weight of what we were uncovering settled over us. Karen thought she could steal our land, build her hotel, erase our legacy, but she had no idea what was coming. Then the phone rang. Marcus checked the caller ID and smiled. County Records Office, Beauty said. They found something in the archives. I turned toward the window, my eyes locked on the land Karen had tried to steal. The fields where my family had worked for generations held a secret, a legal defense stronger than any concrete hotel could ever be. They underestimated us, I said quietly, and that's going to be their biggest mistake. I took a deep breath, staring at the documents spread across the table. This wasn't just about protecting our land anymore. It was about exposing something much bigger. A series of photographs had fallen from the pile, aerial shots of Pine Haven taken decades apart. At first glance, the images looked ordinary, but then I saw it, the subtle shifts in property boundaries, tiny adjustments over the years that no one would have noticed unless they were looking for them. And my grandfather had been looking. One photo caught my attention. Karen's family property from years ago. The lines didn't match the official records. Not quite illegal, but definitely suspicious. We need Marcus to look at these, I said, carefully gathering the documents. But Karen can't know we found them, not yet. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Some secrets are better left buried. I swallowed hard. The game had just changed. The next morning, Sarah watched me carefully, a mix of worry and determination in her eyes. Today was the day everything changed. For weeks, I had gathered evidence like a detective piecing together a crime scene. Now, the truth was about to go public. The Pine Haven Gazette had been hinting at a big expose, and when my phone rang, I knew it was time. "We're running the story today," Jack Miller, the local journalist, said, his voice electric with excitement. "But we need to be careful. Karen isn't going to take this lightly." I understood the risk. Small towns had long memories. Karen had bullied local business owners, silenced opposition, and controlled the narrative for years. But now her iron grip was slipping. Minutes after the newspaper hit the stands, my phone rang again. Karen. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the line like a knife. "You think you can embarrass me?" she hissed. "I've been running this community for decades." I kept my voice even. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I'm just protecting what's rightfully mine." By afternoon, the story had spread beyond Pine Haven. Local coffee shops turned into battlegrounds of conversation. People who had been too afraid to speak up now told their own stories. At a gas station, Mr. Rodriguez, the owner of a small convenience store, leaned in and whispered, "She tried the same thing with my land 10 years ago. I didn't have the courage to fight back." Then a young reporter stood outside my farm, microphone in hand. "A local family is challenging Willow Ridge HOA, alleging illegal land seizure and abuse of power." Karen panicked. She called an emergency HOA meeting. But this time I was ready. The community center was packed. Karen stood at the front, her voice full of manufactured outrage. "This is nothing more than a frivolous attack," she proclaimed, her words echoing through the hall. "This family is trying to disrupt our community's progress." But for every accusation she made, I had documentation. Property surveys from 1946, tax records, maintenance logs. Each piece of evidence was a shield against her lies. Sarah squeezed my hand. Our teenage daughter, Emma, live-streamed the meeting on social media. The community was watching, and this time they were learning the truth. By evening, regional news outlets were calling. Property rights groups took an interest. Karen tried one last intimidation tactic, a legal notice threatening a countersuit. But it was weak, filled with bluster and empty threats. We both knew it. As the sunset bathed our farm in gold, I realized something. This fight wasn't just about land anymore. It was about standing up to bullies, about protecting a family's legacy, about proving that truth and determination could make a difference. Then my phone rang again. This time it was an investigative reporter from a statewide news network. "We want to do a full feature. Would you be willing to tell your story?" I looked at Sarah. She nodded. "Yes," I said. "We're ready." I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about exposing the truth. My fingers traced the faded lines of the old property map spread across Marcus's conference table. Each crease, each tiny notation held secrets. Secrets that had the power to bring Karen down. "Look here," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. His finger hovered over a small, barely noticeable symbol. "Wetlands." I leaned in closer, my pulse quickening. The hotel Karen and the HOA had so brazenly built sat directly on a protected ecological zone. No legal loopholes could save them now. Environmental laws were ironclad, unforgiving. Marcus flipped through the files. Satellite images, geological surveys, water table reports, each one a nail in the HOA's coffin. "They didn't do their homework," he muttered, shaking his head. "They thought they could get away with this." Sarah stepped in, eyes sharp with newfound hope. "The local environmental protection group wants to talk," she said. "They've been tracking wetland violations in this area." Another unexpected ally. Karen had spent years bending the rules, but power has limits, and hers was about to shatter. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I walked inside. Months of preparation had led to this moment. The wooden benches creaked as farmers, community members, and reporters packed the room. At the front, Karen sat rigidly, her usual confidence replaced with barely concealed panic. Marcus leaned over, his voice low. "Stay calm, we've got this." I nodded. I needed to believe that. Judge Elizabeth Hartman, known for her no-nonsense approach, took her seat, her piercing gaze scanning the courtroom. "The court will now hear closing arguments in the matter of Walker versus Willow Ridge HOA," the bailiff announced. Marcus stood first, his navy suit crisp, his voice measured. "Your Honor, what we have here is more than a simple land dispute. This is about a systematic abuse of power, a deliberate attempt to steal a family's legacy through bureaucratic manipulation." Karen's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Hartman silenced him with a sharp look. I caught Karen drumming her fingers against her leather portfolio. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "Miss Whitmore," the judge said, "can you explain why your organization proceeded with hotel construction without a full environmental impact study?" Karen's rehearsed response came quickly. "We followed all standard procedures. The property was technically—" Marcus cut her off. "Your Honor, we have evidence that directly contradicts that." He presented a series of emails, communications between Karen and local officials that exposed backdoor dealings. Each document painted a picture of deliberate circumvention of the law. The room fell silent. Karen gripped the table, her knuckles white. She knew it. She had lost. The courtroom was silent, heavy with tension. Each word spoken, each document presented, peeled away the layers of deception Karen Whitmore had carefully constructed. The disruptions caused by the rushed hotel construction weren't just minor oversights. They were catastrophic. The soil had been disturbed, leading to unstable ground conditions. Rare plant species had been destroyed. And most damning of all, the water table had been compromised. Each point was another nail in the HOA's coffin. I turned my gaze toward Karen. She was cracking. Her perfectly composed exterior was faltering. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead, and for the first time, she didn't have a response. She knew it. Everyone knew it. The same community members who once feared her now watched her with a mix of curiosity and growing respect. For me. Then, the most powerful moment came, unexpectedly. One of the HOA board members, a man I had seen at countless meetings, stood from his seat. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably as he approached the witness stand. When he spoke, his voice shook. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," he said, his eyes darting toward Karen. What she did wasn't right. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Karen stiffened, but I saw it, the way her fingers tightened around her pen, the way her jaw clenched just slightly. She was losing control. Marcus's strategy was clear now. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about exposing a pattern of systematic overreach. Witness after witness took the stand. Former HOA members, local residents, environmental experts. For hours, documents were examined, cross-referenced, analyzed. The courtroom had become a theater of truth. Each piece of evidence pulled another brick from the HOA's carefully built fortress. And Karen knew it. She sat stone-faced, but her confidence was gone, her arrogance replaced with uncertainty. By the time the final moments of the trial arrived, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Elizabeth Hartman, known for her calculated, unshakable demeanor, took her time. She reviewed every document, asked pointed questions, and listened to every testimony with the precision of a seasoned judge. Her face was unreadable, a judicial poker face. Then Marcus approached the bench, his steps measured, deliberate. This was it. He placed one last document on the judge's desk. "Your Honor," he began, "this final piece of evidence will demonstrate the full extent of the HOA's misconduct." Karen's lawyer shot up from his seat, objecting, but everyone in the room knew this was the moment of truth. Judge Hartman held up a hand, silencing the outburst. She took one long, final look at the document. Then she spoke. "The court rules in favor of Jordan Walker." Silence. Then a ripple of whispers. I felt Sarah's hand tighten around mine. Karen sat frozen. The woman who had always bulldozed her way through the town, who had always gotten exactly what she wanted, had just lost. The next morning I walked across the farm, not out of fear, but out of victory. Every step felt like a conversation with my grandfather, the man whose careful planning had protected our land for generations. The wheat fields were already showing signs of new growth. Where the illegal hotel once stood, only foundation scars remained, a reminder of the battle we had fought. Marcus had done more than win a case. He had exposed a network of corruption, a tangled web of shady land deals and backdoor political favors. Karen's entire network was crumbling. 3 city council members had resigned within hours of the ruling. Investigations into other HOA land deals had begun, spreading like wildfire. I knelt down, scooping a handful of soil into my palm. It felt different now. Not just dirt, a symbol of resilience. Over the next few weeks, our small town transformed. Neighbors who once lived in fear of the HOA now stood taller. At local coffee shops, people shared stories of their own struggles with HOA corruption. News stations ran features about our case, inspiring other small landowners to fight back. But this wasn't just about winning, it was about protecting a legacy. My grandfather's meticulous property records, those old leather-bound journals he had kept so carefully, had been our secret weapon. Each handwritten note about land use, each boundary line meticulously recorded. They were more powerful than any modern legal document. Karen wasn't done yet. As the courtroom emptied that day, she had given me one final look, and I knew she wasn't walking away quietly. She appealed the decision, hinting at mysterious connections, powerful figures behind the scenes who could reopen the case. But we were ready. Every potential attack had a counter strategy. The farm wasn't just land anymore. It was a message that said small landowners can stand up to powerful organizations, that careful documentation and community support could overcome corruption. As the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, I felt Sarah's hand slip into mine. "We did it," she whispered. I nodded, but we both knew the real work was just beginning. In the distance, a hawk circled above our land, a silent guardian watching over what we had fought so hard to protect. The battle for my family's land was never just about property. It was about justice, resilience, and the power of a united community. What started as a personal fight against a corrupt HOA president turned into something much bigger. A lesson in standing up to powerful organizations, protecting family legacies, and ensuring that those who abuse their authority are held accountable. Looking back, there are key lessons to take away from this experience. Lessons that every homeowner, small landowner, and community member should remember. One of the most significant lessons is that documentation is power. In the modern world, where legal loopholes and bureaucratic red tape often favor those in power, keeping thorough records is one of the strongest defenses against corruption. My grandfather's meticulous property records, passed down through generations, proved to be the key to exposing the HOA's deception. Each boundary line, each historical note, and each preserved legal document painted a story that could not be denied. It was a stark reminder that while big organizations might have money and influence, knowledge and preparation can level the playing field. This lesson applies beyond property disputes. Whether it's protecting your home, your business, or your rights, having proof can be the difference between winning and losing. Another critical takeaway is that bullies thrive on silence and power crumbles when people start speaking up. For years, Karen Whittemore operated with impunity, intimidating homeowners, bending community rules to suit her interests, and assuming that no one would dare challenge her authority. And she was right, until we decided to fight back. Once the truth about her actions started spreading, others in the community found the courage to share their own experiences. People who had once been too afraid to stand up against the HOA's overreach realized that they weren't alone. It took one person, one voice, to ignite a movement that eventually led to the exposure of widespread corruption. This underscores an important truth. Fear is the greatest tool of the oppressor, but collective action can dismantle even the most deeply rooted injustices. Additionally, the story serves as a reminder that not all authority figures act in the best interest of the people they serve. Homeowners associations, local governments, and regulatory bodies exist to maintain order and fairness. But power in the wrong hands can quickly turn into tyranny. Karen and her allies had been manipulating zoning laws, silencing dissent, and profiting from illegal land grabs. They positioned themselves as community leaders, but in reality, They were exploiting the very people they were supposed to represent. It reinforced the necessity of questioning those in power and holding them accountable, no matter how intimidating they might seem. Blind trust in leadership can lead to unchecked corruption, and history has proven time and time again that when no one asks questions, abuse thrives. This experience also taught me that fighting for what's right is rarely easy, but it's always worth it. The battle against Karen and the HOA was mentally, emotionally, and legally exhausting. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and even fear. She tried every possible tactic to wear us down, from legal threats to media spin, from intimidation to political maneuvering. But in the end, truth and persistence prevailed. This is a lesson for anyone who has ever felt outnumbered or overwhelmed by a seemingly invincible opponent. Justice isn't won overnight, but with enough determination, even the most corrupt systems can be dismantled. The key is to stay the course, gather the right allies, and never let fear dictate your actions. Perhaps the most profound lesson of all is that some things are more valuable than money, power, or convenience. To Karen, my family's land was just another business opportunity, another chance to expand her influence. But to me, it was a piece of history, a symbol of hard work, tradition, and sacrifice. There will always be people who see the world through the lens of greed, willing to destroy something meaningful for the sake of personal gain. But there will also always be those who stand up, fight back, and remind the world that not everything can be bought or stolen. In the end, we won more than just a legal case. We restored faith in our community, proved that the little guy can take on corruption, and inspired others to challenge injustice wherever they see it. The real victory wasn't just reclaiming the land. It was the knowledge that Karen's reign of unchecked power was over, and that the people she had bullied for years had finally found their voice. If there's one takeaway from this fight, it's this: never underestimate the power of truth, perseverance, in a community willing to stand together. Because when people unite against corruption, even the strongest empires can fall. If you enjoyed this story and believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to like this video to show your support for justice. Share this story with your friends and family. Everyone needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. What do you think about this fight against HOA corruption? Have you or someone you know ever faced a similar battle? Let's discuss in the comments below. Your support helps bring more real and eye-opening stories to life. Together, we can expose the truth and inspire change. Hit that subscribe button and join the movement.